Well, it's the first full week of the election campaign, which means, of course, Laura's in the back of a van in a car park.
Again.
I'm in a car park on the outskirts of Edinburgh because in Dalkeith today we've been talking to the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn.
Now, do you know what today is the 1 year anniversary of? What was happening on the 14th of November 2018? Do you remember?
Was it one of the meaningful votes?
No.
Was it the signing of the Brexit
Was it when...
withdrawal agreement with Theresa May?
Yeah, it was something to do with Theresa May getting a deal with the EU.
Yes, it was after the 8-hour-long cabinet meeting where the cabinet signed off on the withdrawal agreement, and it sounded like this.
I know that there will be difficult days ahead. This is a decision which will come under intense scrutiny, and that is entirely as it should be and entirely understandable. But the choice was this deal, which enables us to take back control and to build a brighter future for our country, or going back to square one, with more division, more uncertainty, and a failure to deliver on the referendum.
Happy birthday, Theresa May's initial withdrawal agreement. Welcome to Brexitcast.
Brexitcast from the BBC.
No one's got a clue what Brexit is.
Brexit is...
I hadn't quite understood the full extent of this. We're particularly reliant on the Dover-Calais crossing.
I met Boris Johnson once.
The doubters, the doomsters, the gloomsters, they are going to get it wrong again.
Remainers and leavers, that's going to end well.
A process which I can only describe as a dog's Brexit.
It's Laura in a car park on the outskirts of Edinburgh.
And it's Chris in Brexitcast HQ with two friends.
Katya's by your side, which is quite nice. And by my side.
And it's me, Adam, by your side. So, right, the big story...
Oh, you're all together.
We are, yes.
We are.
Yes.
But you're here in spirit and in van.
And the big story on the election campaign today, of course, has been immigration, free movement, who will do what with the after Brexit. And I think it was summed up, the Conservative position, by Steve Barclay, the Brexit Secretary, who was talking about football.
People don't always put football and our new Brexit deal together, unless it's Gary Lineker going on about Remain again. But one of the things about taking control of our immigration is we can decide, do we want more English qualified players in the Premier League, which is something the FA are keen to see, or do we want to have more talented players from Brazil, Africa, Argentina and elsewhere in the world, as the Premier League are keen to see. So we'll actually have much more say as to where we recruit players from, do it on talent, rather than it being because they're in Europe as opposed to the rest of the world.
Had the rather sort of feel of it of, it's a week into the campaign, we better do some social media. So he has his phone on record, and there he is, I think, in a constituency office. And then talking about the Premier League, I'm not sure I was all that much the wiser by the end of it than I was at the beginning. And the curiosity today, Laura, in terms of, well, both what the Conservatives have been saying about immigration and Labour, is that I guess one of the consequences of the imminence of Brexit is that the parties have to decide what they want to say about immigration. And the two big parties are both kind of picking their language pretty carefully around it, whether it be Steve Barclay, Boris Johnson, Priti Patel on the Conservative side, or Jeremy Corbyn on the Labour side, and in Scotland where you are.
That's absolutely right. And the really interesting thing about immigration this time round is that, you know, the two parties genuinely have very, very different approaches, because the Tories, who want us out of the European Union after Brexit in January, would be able to, as they would say, take back control and have a system where the UK is making decisions over who can come in and who can't, and they would end free movement. On the other side, you've got the Labour Party, who of course say they'd want to have another Brexit referendum, and if that referendum meant we stayed in, well then of course it'd be unlimited EU immigration, because that's part of being in the European Union. But if not, well, they still kind of believe in freedom of movement, and they want to make it easier for people to bring family members here to do so-called family reunion. But exactly as you say, Chris, both parties have been kind of getting a bit snarled up talking about it today. You know, we asked Jeremy Corbyn loads of times today if he thought immigration should be higher or lower. He wouldn't say. A colleague of ours, I think, from ITV asked the Home Secretary Priti Patel if the Tories really wanted to cut immigration, and she kept going on about control.
Four
and the way I
times
see it,
she
I think
couldn't
it's
answer
because
it.
Labour doesn't want people to think Really interesting. Overnight, the Tories sent out a press release saying they did want to cut immigration, because they do. But the Tories don't want voters to think that they're really mean and hard-edged and they want to slam the door on everyone. Labour doesn't want voters to think that they'd open the door to everyone. So exactly as you say, they're both kind of tripping over it a bit, because they know it's such a big issue for loads of voters.
And then this phrase about the the Australian point system for immigration, this keeps being wheeled out on the Conservative side. Does everybody understand, do you think, sort of in the general public, what's meant by that? Because there's quite a lot of controversy around the phrase too.
Well, they've given a smidgen of detail about what might account for getting points and what might not. So they were saying last night into this morning that having a decent grasp of English for working and living was important, that it was all about skills gaps in the economy. Because that's the curiosity, isn't it? On the one hand, some people talk about reducing unskilled immigration, but then if the government was to conclude that it needed people to pick fruit, for instance, that could be a skill that was required, or a labour market that needed filling, rather than it just being, I don't know, a super qualified brain surgeon.
And wasn't there a salary limit at one point?
Yeah, that is something that's in the mix with the Migration Advisory Committee, the experts, and I notice everyone is punting all the difficult decisions for whoever's in government to the boffins on the Mac, as it's called. Now, Laura, you mentioned your big interview with Jeremy Corbyn in Scotland today, which we'd call a sit-down in the trade. What is the big thing that he said in the sit-down?
Well, beyond, I think for me the most interesting thing was how he just didn't want to go there on immigration, as we were just discussing. But the other point that I really wanted to put to him is on Brexit, which we've talked about so many times on Brexitcast, haven't we? The agony over how Labour have moved to this position of offering another referendum, but not wanting to say which way they would go round. And remember, it's important right now, because we're in an election, and in the last election, Labour used the phrase in their manifesto that they accepted the result. So I wanted to ask him if he thought that he was maybe breaking a promise.
The 2017 manifesto also said Labour accepts the referendum result. Now you are offering people another referendum, so you don't accept that result as being conclusive. Doesn't your change of heart on Brexit undermine people's trust?
I think what we've done is a sensible approach. I recognise why people voted Remain and why people voted Leave in different parts of the country and for different reasons, in my own communities where I represent, but also all across the country. I also recognise that a no-deal exit from the EU would be catastrophic in many, many ways.
But there was a deal on the table you could have voted for, and you made people a promise in 2017, and you haven't stuck to it. Now, doesn't that matter?
The promise I made was that we would respect the result of the referendum.
Accept the referendum result is what your manifesto said.
And we have done that, and therefore we've had many meetings with the EU about the issues of what would be the possibilities on Remain, of reform and so on, as well as Leave. And what we've come to a conclusion as a party is that we would put to the electorate the principle that a Labour government elected on December the 12th will, within 3 months, negotiate with the EU an arrangement by which we could leave the EU but protect market rights and the Good Friday Agreement, which are absolutely crucial, and put that alongside Remain in a referendum.
Well, if you're a Labour candidate, try and explain that on the doorstep. I mean, lots of Labour candidates that I've talked to, before the election and since the campaign, they are getting it back on the doors in Leave voting areas, but the fact that some people perceive it, that they went back on their promise, and that could be a big problem for them in this campaign.
Now, we were asking Brexitcasters, weren't we, today on social media for their questions for us on the whole issue of the election and Brexit and what might happen afterwards, and I think we can take a quick listen to one now.
Hi, I'm Sammy, I'm 25 and I'm from Aylesbury in Buckinghamshire, and I just wondered, how likely are the EU to accept a new renegotiated deal if a Labour government get in?
That's one for you.
Yes, well, Jean-Claude Juncker the other week told me that he thought it wasn't very realistic, but he also pointed out it would be up to the new Commission, and frankly, it'll be up to EU leaders to decide. And if we look back at these negotiations, the EU always said it would change its red lines if the UK changed its red lines, and it's always in the EU's interest to have the UK as close as possible, if not inside the EU, then as close as possible to the EU. So if Labour comes along and says, you know what, we think we need to have Brexit, we need to negotiate a Brexit deal anyway and put it to another referendum, we're in favour of a much softer Brexit, much closer to the single market, part of a customs union, and so on, then I think EU leaders will say, OK. The fact that they've said they won't reopen, they always say they won't reopen. Put it this way, I remember, I'll keep this brief, but I'm just going to illustrate it. When I was at school, I had to wear a school uniform and we hated it. And we always wanted to get rid of school uniform. And we were told the reason that you have school uniform is because then you can rebel against something quite minimal, as opposed to having lots of freedoms and to take more. So if the EU says it won't reopen the withdrawal agreement and then does, people say, oh, they've broken their word. But actually, on substance, so far, they haven't given away that much. And I think this would be in their interest. The EU compromises when it's in its own interest.
And this is why I cannot wait for the Labour manifesto whenever it comes out, because the actual details of what the Labour New Deal would look like are quite sketchy. We know the outlines, we know the big themes, single market relationship and a customs union, but how that would actually work in practice.
And same as well with the Conservatives. As you say, we know about this points-based system, but not the specifics of what would get points. And over what time frame, but do they perhaps want to reduce the number?
But a word of warning, guys. I'm not sure that the manifestos are going to be encyclopedia-like. I think they're going to be more like a pamphlet than War and Peace.
And also, I think on free movement, it's worth pointing out that even if, the Conservatives win a majority, come into government, pass this Brexit deal, put an end to free movement, when it comes to trade negotiations, you can expect it right back on that table, because what does the EU want from the UK when it comes to trade negotiations? The EU wants access for their fishermen to UK waters, and they want access to the UK labour market as well for their workers. So you may say bye-bye in the end of January, if that comes to pass, and you'll say hello again to the issue when it comes to trade negotiations.
And one assumes in those negotiations of the future on trade deals around the world that other countries might bring migration into
India,
the question.
for example.
Exactly, in return for other elements of a deal.
And will no one think of the low-paid international global football players? Right, Nigel Farage, Brexit Party. What do we now know about what they are and aren't doing in this election, Chris?
So they are saying that they aren't going to stand in those seats that the Conservatives won last time, but they are going to stand elsewhere, subject to potentially the odd local candidate deciding that they're not that keen on it. We will find out pretty soon when we have the full grid of who is standing where. Let's take a listen to Nigel Farage.
We've seen 3.5 years now of former Prime Ministers, the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrats, actually saying that they want to effectively overturn the greatest democratic exercise in the history of our nation. Well, we're not having it, and we're going to stand up, and we're going to fight Labour in every seat in this country, be in no doubt.
The curiosity here, Laura, is that there was kind of a logic to the Brexit Party saying, right, we're going to stand everywhere because we think the Boris Johnson Brexit deal is rubbish. And there'd kind of be a logic to saying, well, we're not going to stand hardly anywhere because Boris Johnson needs to get a majority in order for Brexit to be delivered. And their concluding position seems to sit awkwardly halfway between those two.
Yeah, very irritatingly for the Conservatives. Ministers have been saying to me this week, if he really wants to get Brexit done, why isn't he pulling out of those marginal seats? And, although the candidates list closed today, I would not be surprised if some more Brexit Party candidates actually stood down in the next couple of weeks. And I think, Nigel Farage is cross. I think he's really, really cross. And I think also the Brexit Party are disappointed because just a couple of months ago they were promising to shake up the whole system, to completely transform everything. Remember, they came first in the European elections, but where we are at the moment in this general election campaign, as the great Professor Sir John, all the bells and whistles Curtis said today, show me a seat where it actually looks like the Brexit Party might win, to paraphrase.
Mm-hmm. Can I just ask something, that considering that a lot of people who move towards UKIP or the Brexit Party are former Labour voters, if people are turning away from the Brexit Party, as polls are suggesting at the moment, are those people, even if they voted Leave or are in favour of Brexit, are they likely to go to the Conservatives, or aren't they more likely to go back to their original home, Labour? I mean, how can one know which way they go if they leave?
It's curious, this, isn't it, Laura? Because on the one hand, Nigel Farage has been making a big play in the last few days about how dangerous he can be to Labour. On the other hand, a lot of number crunching that's been done by people in the past around this have suggested that Brexit Party and before them UKIP took more votes from the Conservatives than they did for Labour. And then on the opinion poll point, the curiosity is that some of these opinion polls were when it looked like they were going to be standing the Brexit Party everywhere in England, Scotland and Wales, pretty much. And over the last few days, of course, we've learnt that isn't going to be the case. So you wonder how much you can actually read into that.
And then it's got even more complicated because you've got the Unite to Remain, the alliance of remaining parties, which is Plaid Cymru, Greens, Lib Dems. Lots of debate about whether that'll make any difference whatsoever. And then, of course, you've got these individual races where there's high-profile people who are maybe standing as independents. And then you've got people from the parties who have done deals or not deals. Then some of their rejected people standing as independents. So the arrows actually are kind of going all over the place. And at last, Laura, I've now realised what you mean. It's about 650 different elections, or maybe 540 different elections.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that is why all of that is what makes this election completely fascinating, completely unpredictable, and very, very, very hard to read. That said, it is clear the Brexit Party is more likely to take votes from Conservative tending voters than from Labour voters, but we know it's absolutely central to the Tory strategy is to try to get those hacked off disgruntled Labour leavers in places like Bishop Auckland, in parts of the Midlands, in parts of the North East. That's their target, that's who they're going after. And that's the gamble, because, you know, in Number 10 and in Tory HQ, they reckon that we might be living through this big alignment where people identify more Leave versus Remain than they did Tory Labour. But blimey, it's a gamble, isn't it? A huge one.
Right, let's get another Brexitcaster's question. I have a feeling this one is a bit speculative and looking into the future. And it's from Izzy.
Hi guys, my name's Izzy, I'm 20, I'm from Huddersfield in West Yorkshire. My question is, if the result is a hung parliament with the Conservatives as the largest party, would partnering with the DUP be much harder because they're strongly against Boris Johnson's Brexit deal? Thank you. Oh, and by the way, I think you guys are amazing. Bye.
Thank you, Izzy. It's always good to up the Yorkshire counts on Brexitcast.
Hard question, though.
But yeah, it's a hard question, which I'm going to duck by saying, hang on a minute, it sounds like you had an insight that it was coming and the kind of question that was coming at him, which is cheating.
I think my answer to that, I mean, obviously it's hugely speculative, isn't it? But, I mean, wouldn't it be virtually impossible for a Tory party government without a majority to now do a deal again with the DUP when the DUP are so unhappy about what happened to the Ireland Protocol and the withdrawal agreement? They're furious.
They renegotiated again with the EU. Or try to.
Yeah, I mean, Laura, it would be virtually in
That's
current.
what I was going to say.
Yeah, on current situation, it would be virtually impossible for them to team up again, wouldn't it?
Yeah, because unless Boris Johnson said, "Okay, I will undo the deal that I just nearly won the election based on."
Can you imagine Brussels?
And go back to Brussels with Arlene Foster. I mean, so I think that's pretty tricky. And there's a lot of bad feeling there too. But, you know, never say never in this process. Never say never to anything at all.
Oh, but you know who we might never hear from again, or certainly not in this form? Donald Tusk, President of the European Council. He did a big speech in Bruges last night, which is his last set-piece speech before he leaves the Europa building in Brussels at the end of this month.
Things become irreversible only when people start to think so. So the only words that come to my mind today are simply, don't give up. In this match, we had added time, now we are in extra time. Perhaps it will even go to penalties.
So more football.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's almost like he knew what we were starting the podcast with tonight.
It is, and it was, and we won't sing "Don't Give Up," of course. But Donald Tusk had seemed that he had sort of given up hope, but you know, clearly he hasn't. He also then went on again about staying with football, how after Brexit he said the UK would become a second-rate player, and he didn't just leave that in his own words. He said, you know, I've heard that when I've gone to India, and listed a whole load of other countries as well. But just to say that Donald Tusk, in his parting words, he doesn't just give it for Brexit. He had a good old go at Emmanuel Macron. As well,
all the way through the speech. Yeah.
So what was he saying about the French president then?
This is probably another cast for considering that we've got so much to talk about. But put it this way, Donald Tusk is Polish, and France and Poland have got very different ideas on defence, relations with NATO, relations with Russia at the moment, and how to approach Vladimir Putin. So.
Anyway, that was Wednesday night, but tonight, on Thursday night, as we were recording this, we've got a bit of breaking news about the absent, invisible UK nominee to be the next commissioner.
That's right, because at the last summit of EU leaders, the UK agreed to a communique which said that the UK would have to nominate a new commissioner if it was still in the bloc. And so even if the UK were to leave on the 31st of January, we are supposed to say, look, this is our suggestion for a new commissioner. Why is this? Because Jean-Claude Juncker is about to leave and you're about to have a brand new commission and the UK is supposed to have another commissioner. Now, Boris Johnson said we can't do that because we're in the middle of an election campaign. But the European Commission, who call themselves the guardians of the laws, and they are under EU law, said EU law trumps UK law, and therefore you do need to give us a commissioner. And so it's going to get legal.
And Laura, there's more than a smidgen of politics in all of this, because from the government's perspective, and of course there still is a government, the Conservatives want to be able to say, well, we're going to be shot of this lot fairly soon, so why would we want to send a commissioner? And can kind of hide behind this thing about during an election campaign and say, look, this is a political appointment, and well, it'd be terribly wrong of us to send out a political appointee, because who knows, we might lose the election and it'll be up to the next government to decide what to do.
Exactly. And I think, Boris Johnson said, we will never send a commissioner. So politically, he wants to stick to that promise. The thing I don't get about it is that the cabinet guidelines that say in black and white, page 36, paragraph 10, I think, it does say really clearly the UK rules say we shouldn't do it during an election period. And as I understand it, other countries have also made a similar decision in years gone by. So the thing I don't get is why it took so long, either for the UK to find that convenient rule or for the EU to say, oh, right, OK. So I don't really know, other than maybe both sides wanting to have a bit of a row about it. And the other thing about it also, it's only 11 days. So I think maybe it suits both sides to continue having a bit of a spat about it. But it is interesting. And what it does take you to also is that, well, which is more important, the UK law that says you can't do this by UK government regulation, or the EU law? Where have I had that before?
No, we can answer that pretty easy. It's the EU law, because that's what the EU treaties say. But that's something for the courts to fight out. If it ever gets to the courts.
It's also.
And I was being and I was taking it very literally.
We have no humour, the Brussels crowd. Don't you know that, Laura? We have no humour. But this is also, I think, partly the incoming commission. They're embarrassed anyway. It's not just about the UK, the fact that they're delayed in taking their position. There's been all sorts of embarrassments and awkwardness and complications around different countries' commissioners, including France. So yes, I think there's an element of theatre, and the Commission would be able to work without the UK. And by the way, the Lisbon Treaty looked at narrowing down the number of commissioners anyway to 2/3 of the number, even though I won't even go into the law about why that's not relevant right now.
Adam, I'm nervous because you are wielding a A4 piece of paper and shielding it from us.
Yeah, because it's a quiz. So, this is a Bruges-based quiz in honour of Donald Tusk's valedictory speech in that beautiful Belgian canal-filled city. So, right, are you ready? Thinking hats on. So this is a Bruges-based quiz.
Can I just say, before we start, all I know about Bruges is that I went there once for a weekend and I had strawberry beer and it was a big mistake.
No, I bet you got hammered very quickly. Yeah.
It's the Venice of Belgium.
Right, so... It's not a trivia quiz. This is how it's going to work. I'm going to give you a series of quotes. You have to tell whether they're from Donald Tusk's Bruges speech last night, Margaret Thatcher's Bruges speech from 1988.
You are joking.
Or the film In Bruges featuring Colin Farrell. So here's a practice. Here's the first. This is not for any points. Here's the quote. A great day this has turned out to be. I'm suicidal, my mate tries to kill me, my gun gets nicked, and we're still in effing Bruges.
Oh, that sounds like Lady Thatcher.
Yeah. Is that your final answer?
No.
It's a Brexitcast answer.
The film.
Correct. Okay, so that one was just for fun, but you've got the spirit of the quiz.
Right.
Here's the next.
It's going to get harder, isn't it?
It's like inviting Genghis Khan to speak on the virtues of peaceful coexistence.
Donald Tusk.
In Bruges?
Well, if you just do all three, you're going to get it, aren't you?
Well, that's the way to win, isn't it?
It was, let's reveal the answer, Margaret Thatcher, 1988. Next one. Here's the quote. Here's the quote. Is it Thatcher, Tusk, or In Bruges? Laura, this one's for you. After all, even the Germans are sometimes right. Tusk, Thatcher or Bruges?
Thatcher, it must be.
No, it was Donald Tusk last night. This is going very well. Right. Last one.
I'm suddenly feeling sympathy for Steve Barclay when we had him on Brexitcast all those months ago and he did appallingly badly.
Anyway, he would say he did fine. Right. Here's the last one in the Bruges quiz. So, is this Margaret Thatcher, Donald Tusk, or the film in Bruges? That's one thing I like about Europe, though. You don't have to learn any of their languages. It's quite Thatcher-esque, isn't it?
Yeah.
It does, but it wouldn't be if you said that.
I would say Thatcher.
Yeah, I would.
Wrong, it's from In Bruges the film.
He's a
you worked with Adam for long enough.
Just as well, that was just for fun, that
Can
quiz.
I just tell you something? To salvage my quiz reputation, I'd like to say that me and my crew in this van today got everything right apart from one on Popmaster this morning as we were driving through Northumberland.
That is
So
impressive.
you've been working hard today then?
That's what everyone says, though, and then rings up the day after and gets the three.
I have a quick point to make, important point to make,
Yes,
I think.
about Big Phil.
About Big Phil. Phil Hogan, he's going to be the Commissioner for Trade in the incoming commission. He's from Ireland, very outspoken, seen as a tough guy. He said something yesterday to RTE that on the one hand helped Boris Johnson, on the other didn't really. So he said, listen, we could definitely start free trade negotiations by St. Patrick's Day, he said, and yes, it could be conducted really quickly because, we've got so much in common already with our rules and regulations. So a big tick for Boris Johnson there. Less good for him. He then added breezily, because of course the UK would be signing up to EU norms and regulations, because UK voters wouldn't want to sort of reduce their rights and everything. So of course that's not necessarily what Boris Johnson wants to do, because remember all that talk about level playing fields and so on. You cannot do a quick trade deal when the devil will be in all of the details, really, realistically speaking.
Before we clear off, let's do that traditional thing of looking ahead. And we've lost Laura by the looks of it.
Okay.
Laura, I think we've lost you. The car park has given up on you.
I think I've lost myself by now, to be perfectly frank. But I'll be back next week. It's Manifesto Week next week. Big one.
Hurrah!
So lots more then.
Yes.
Bye.
Oh, Adam can wear a manifesto.
It's like this is like the Brexitcast equivalent of sort of Strictly, isn't it? Where they say, "Oh, next week it's Halloween week or whatever." And we're
Cha-cha
saying,
week.
It's Manifesto
Blackpool.
Week.
Yeah.
Which would be good though, even if they are quite thin, as Laura was saying. Actually, getting into the detail and underlining bits
And about
putting
immigration,
it to,
like
exactly,
as we started.
Exactly, it'd be
our
great.
Other things happening in the very near future. On Saturday, we'll see Task Force 50, the European Commission's negotiating team, become the UK task force focused on the negotiations for the future relationship. Weirdly, starting on a Saturday.
Also on a Saturday, the Labour getting together to actually nail down what is in their manifesto. Proper meeting where they have to nail all that down. Could be interesting to hear what noises off there are in terms of priorities.
That's the Clause 5 meeting it's called, isn't
Indeed,
it?
yeah.
See, I'm getting used to this domestic politics lingo.
Yeah.
Anything else we want to point
I think
out?
we very possibly very soon may find out, since we talked about the Commission, that Jean-Claude Juncker will see the year out with us rather than handing over to the new Commission with the new UK Commissioner or not. It's already been extended, my friend.
Well, another one.
Yes,
Yeah.
it was supposed to have started on the 1st of November. So kicking that can down the road.
And on nearly all of those days, you'll be able to listen to a fresh episode of Election Cast, which is our almost daily podcast about the thrills and spills from the election campaign. Right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Nice sitting between you.
Yeah.
Brexitcast.
Brexitcast
From the BBC.